Hi everyone, and thank you for joining me to have this short chat. I'm doing these videos because it's Pride Month first off, and also too is Immigration Heritage Month. So I wanted to get some insight and feedback from persons that are part of that community and understand what life is like for them. So today I have this lovely person that I've known for a while. I've met them from uni days when they started with Quiche, and then Quiche became Eglad. So what I will do is ask you to share your preferred name, your pronouns, where you were born or grew up, and what country you live in now.
Hi, so my name is Rowan Mohammed. My pronouns are she, her. I was born and raised in Trinidad and Tobago, and now I live in Barbados. I've lived in Barbados since 2011, so just over a decade now. It's been a while.
Well, I can still see your reference to that Tobago because I see the pendant on your chain and the five colors, all there, all there.
Yeah,
Um,
I have my pride nails done. I'm glad you noticed. Of course, I always rep Trinidad and Tobago.
So this kind of already answers my question, but I'm gonna still ask it. Do you identify within the LGBTQ plus community?
Yes, I do, and I think for me, like the label within the identity has been a bit fluid. And it's really exemplified for me how fluid sexuality is because for a long time I just identified as a lesbian, but now I identify as queer. And I feel like that's more encompassing of who I am as a person.
And actually, before we move on to that, I will answer you because I've had my own journey. Mainly, you grow up and you are kind of told, oh, you're this. I was like a cisgendered gay male, and I have now moved into something that for me has been what I have felt and more comfortable with. So like, what does queer mean to you? Wasn't kind of the question I had, but it does mention it is something that really I'm interested in.
It's okay. Yeah, so I think I was more rigid with my identity and like belonging to that like category of lesbian when I was younger. Um, as a cis woman lesbian. But as time has gone by, I think taste change, attraction changes, and things become more expansive. So for me, it's really important to identify that I am part of this community. But queer for me just means that I'm under the umbrella of non-cishet people and that I am in solidarity and in community with other people who are not heterosexual or people who are gender and sexual minorities.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you shared that because also too, historically queer did at one point have a negative undertone with it, and we have kind of reclaimed that word and use it very proudly and strong. So I'm going to
Yeah,
move on.
definitely. I think it's definitely about reclaiming that narrative, and I think now it has just such a neutral to positive connotation. So I think we've done a really good job at reclaiming that word.
Very, very true. So what was life like for you where you grew up in Trinidad? And being
Mm.
LGBT as well, LGBTQ plus.
Yeah. So I definitely wasn't out. I think the first time that I realized that I had attraction to women or same gender attraction, I was 11. I was in Form 1. I distinctly remember when it happened and being like, oh my God, what's happening? But I didn't tell a soul because there wasn't any sort of like options to be not straight. That's just the default. And I grew up very Catholic. I went to um, Catholic primary school, all girls Catholic convent, and my family was very Catholic. So yeah, being queer just wasn't an option. I just thought that it was something that I needed to suppress within myself. Um, and I was aware of LGBT people growing up because I would see on TV, so for example, like growing up in secondary school, I would watch shows like sorry, I'm outside. I would see shows like, Queer as Folk and the L Word, but it didn't seem to align with my reality. I just saw it as something that was so different. I saw it as something foreign, as something adult, because that was the visibility and the representation that I had. So to be able to find myself within that narrative, I really struggled. And I just thought maybe maybe it was just a one-time thing. Maybe I will just grow into straightness. Um, and even when it came to representation of LGBT people uh, in Trinidad growing up, there'd be, whisperings of like this person is gay, this person is gay, or people who are like openly gender non-conforming, but people sort of view them as spectacle. So growing up, there was a very visible trans woman called Saucy Powell. And she was just sort of a spectacle, She wasn't somebody that was celebrated. Like her gender identity was something that was spectacle, that was sort of like made fun of. It was like a punchline, something that was seen as humorous. Or even other people. So growing up, uh, there are a lot of people from the community in the arts in Trinidad, and particularly in Carnival, and who have contributed to our culture. Um, so people who are suspected to be LGBT, but I hadn't heard from them themselves that they were queer. And it seems like they were sort of celebrated in spite of their sexuality. Like their contributions to our culture were undeniable. And it seemed like their sexuality was a sort of by the way thing that people tolerated but didn't really want to address outwardly. But yeah, those were the representations that I had growing up. So it was really difficult for me to see myself in that. Also, a lot of the visibility, I didn't see like queer women represented, or queer young women, queer Black women. Yeah, so it was a bit confusing for me. And I didn't, I think, come into my sexuality or even come out until I moved to Barbados when I was 19.
Thanks for sharing that. And actually, when you said Chelsea's name, it made me smile because I lived in Trinidad for a bit, and I remember there was always a certain noise and then a hush as Chelsea would start to come. So you knew they were coming. So there's this noise, and then as soon as they're passing, there was a hush, just like let them pass, let them move on quickly, and then you start talking again as they pass. But and that was great memories because I think they were amazing person. But again, I think class always is an interesting thing because when you did mention that the persons that are involved in carnival and have made a name for themselves, they then have income and class to support their ability and lifestyle. Whereas Celsi was, very much like a street person. So they saw the difference of treatment and where these people were known for their art, also she was known for was sexuality and being a vagrant. Anyway, I'm going to move on and ask, so what made you decide to leave and what was that decision like to leave Trinidad and move to another country?
So as I mentioned, I grew up in a really religious and conservative household. And I felt like parts of me were just being stifled in that space. Um, my sexuality, but also other things. I'm like not a conservative person. I'm atheist, so a lot of my values just didn't align with the environment that I was in. So I really needed a change, and I wanted some independence, and I wanted a chance to explore myself without the like rigid boundaries that were being placed upon me. So I moved to Barbados initially to attend university, which is where I met you when I was at UE. And that is when I got into my first relationship with somebody of the same gender. And it was just so freeing, so liberating to explore that aspect of myself um, without stigma, without judgment, without boundaries. And almost immediately, being in that relationship, I was able to meet a lot of other queer people by association, queer and trans people within the UE space, and sort of realize the lack of structural support that existed for people who are part of the LGBT community. So within, I think, my first year of getting into my first relationship, I was like, I'm an activist. I'm just like hit the ground running, and co-founded Big Glad.
Yeah, you went from not 19, not knowing about anything, and you were very much part of building legacy. Um, I can't think of at that time not knowing you and being involved in the work that was happening at UE and then in broader the country and Caribbean. So that move, you kind of touched on it, but so we won't really go into what that was like when you moved, but what is like for you now? Been together all these experiences and maturing into the advocate that you are.
Yeah. So it's been an interesting journey. I think when I first got involved in things, I was just so passionate. Um, and there was also a bit of naivety that came with me just like diving headfirst into activism and being so public. I didn't anticipate the amount of pushback and opposition and bigotry, discrimination, violence that I would be subject to directly because I was involved in like such public activism. And I think that wasn't very commonplace at the time. And I also think it was really important and noteworthy that I was a young queer Black woman with Donya, who's also a young queer Black woman, um, pushing advocacy forward and visibility forward in that way because I hadn't seen a lot of that in my experience growing up. And I thought that that visibility is really important because if you look at the LGBT movement, not even just in the Caribbean, but globally, I think women have always been a really integral part of movement building. Cis women, trans women, queer women have always been a really integral part of pushing progress forward. But there was a really huge discrepancy when it came to visibility and also the allocation of resources. Because when I joined advocacy at the time, still a lot of resource allocation was really specific to queer cis men, particularly around the lens of HIV. It was really clinical, really one dimensional, and I think really reductive of our dynamic and really diverse experiences as a whole community. So yeah, over the last decade or plus, it's been a learning journey for me. And at one point, I think a couple of years ago, I just really needed to take a break. There's just so much burnout, um, so much PTSD, I think, from a lot of the traumas that accumulated through my experiences with activism. Um, yeah, and now I'm in a much better place because I was able to step back. I think for a while I was like pushing myself, giving my all, even through homelessness. I was like I would be organizing an event, doing a workshop, and then going and like sleeping on the floor in an office somewhere because I didn't have anywhere to stay, you know? So it really took a toll on my mental health. But over the past 3 years, like I think like right before the pandemic hit, I hit a wall and I really decided to prioritize myself and my well-being and my health without guilt. And it was difficult at first because I did feel a lot of guilt. I felt as though I was like abandoning my community. And I still sometimes feel like if I'm not showing up in a particular way all the time, working myself to the bone, that it seems as though I don't care about the community as much. But I've been able to reconcile that like if I'm not at 100%, I can't give to anybody else. And also, there are just so many more actors involved in this space now that I feel like if I step away, things things can continue, and they have because I've stepped away for a couple of years now from as much activism as I was doing and as much advocacy work as I was doing. And there are organizations like Equals who are just like who have really picked up that mantle and have been able to move things forward. And I'm really proud to see where the community has come. Yeah, so now I'm in a really happy place. I feel quite at ease, quite settled, and I'm just really proud of our movement in Barbados, but also the wider Caribbean and all of the things that we've been able to achieve and the way in which it becomes so structured, you know. I think there's a quite solid structured movement now. And that's something to be really proud of because I think it also happened in a really short time.
This is true. I think for when we look at it, it's 10 years that we've seen these changes. And I'm not saying that we haven't seen leaps and bounds before, because when you look back at the work that ULab has done and I'm hearing their history and story, that was a big um, push back then. But then you knew there was a lull and there was a breakdown in community organizations, CSOs, community service organizations. And when Be Glad then came up, that was a reigniting of that type of community organization that can help push the work. And I do agree with you as well. Mental burnout is very real. Physical and mental burnout in this work is very real. It happens to nearly all of us. And I'm actually happy when I see also something or hear something and realize, oh, there are other people that can do this or see other people do it. Because there was a point when there was only a very few of us. You can count on your hand the amount of people that will always have to be at a workshop, always have to turn up to speak, always called for the interview. So, you know, taking care of yourself, making sure yourself is, or you're in a good place, and then also to now seeing others come into the spotlight. I actually am so happy to see others in the spotlight. Like, oh, I can just sit back and be in the audience and watch. Really a great place to be. Anyway, thank you so much for sharing. And as I said, I just having a short conversation because it's June and it's Pride Month, and as well as it's Immigration Heritage Month. And I think having you share your experience not just with Trinidad but Barbados as well, and invite the Caribbean, we're all richer for it, and also contributing to the work that you've done for just here and for our community. We are definitely richer for it. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Renee, and thank you for all of your contributions as well. I think like even when I first joined this space, you were one of the like few people who was involved in this work, and we're having conversations beyond like the sort of like one note advocacy that was dominant at that time. Yeah, so I take a lot of inspiration from you, and I'm really grateful to know you and to see your work flourish over time as well.
Thank you for that as well. Actually, funny enough, I have to send it to you first. I saw a picture from one of birthday, and the two of us with your cake, and we just looked at it very intensely. I
Oh my
didn't
God,
get a
yes,
chance.
send it to me. Yes, yes,
I
I know
will
what you're talking
send
about.
it.
Oh my God, my 23rd birthday. Yeah, when we
Yes,
cut the cake together.
yes.
Yeah,
I will
that
share
was a
that
while
with
ago.
you outside of this call. But again, thank you so much. And I know I'll be seeing you Saturday. As well,
Yes,
we get to talk about family and what it looks for LGBTQ people and other wider conversations as well. And actually, it's so interesting that that's happening Saturday because Saturday there's some fringe organization doing a march against, something.
I saw. I
But
saw. Hopefully they're busy with that. Too busy to show up though.
but they were busy doing their own thing. But I think actually having that kind of conversation, I think that we're actually looking at this. We as a community, we are for child protection. Um, we strongly believe that in wider sense of community and also for LGBTQ youth, making sure that they're protected against bullying, harassment, making sure they're protected against abuse, be it physical or sexual, and verbal. So I am for this bill, and what I'm looking at it. If there's areas that we can say, well, this needs strengthening to make sure there's even more protection, we are there for it. There's nothing against, we have nothing against what is, I think, proposed. I don't know how you feel. You're still mute.
Yeah, sorry, I was struggling to unmute. Yeah, I think there's this really strange misconception that the conversation around like family and children rights are mutually exclusive from LGBT rights. But like LGBT people have all been children. Um, some of
Some
the
of us
most
have
vulnerable
children.
children. Right. And we all come from families. We are part of families. We have families. So this is for all of our battlemates. And I think there just really needs to be some dialogue around this issue because there's a misconception about what our priorities are and who the community is and what the community really wants. We're definitely for comprehensive protection of people's rights, particularly vulnerable in society. And some of the most vulnerable people in society are children, particularly children who are at the margins, trans youth, queer youth, youth of like lower socioeconomic standing. And I think people fail to remember that intersections exist,
Yes, exactly.
so yeah, all for it.
Okay, so we're gonna end on that note, and thank you again.
Thank you.